on a day when there's an awful lot of people not doing any work of any kind. We're told that something like 500,000 people are out today not going to work. Let's see if we can tally up exactly what's going on. On the teaching front, something like 100,000 teachers in 23,000 schools across England and Wales are affected. Thousands of railway drivers, represented by ASLEF apparently, are striking, meaning there's no trains across 15 networks. 100,000 civil servants and 124 government departments are walking out, including DVLA. 1,900 members of the Unite union employed by Abellio in London will walk out for 3 days of strikes and no buses. 70,000 members of the University and College Union employed in 150 UK universities striking. Security guards at University College London will down tools. What tools are they downing? In a row over pay and outsourcing. I mean, these people, unbelievable. What the hell do they think they're doing? Bringing the economy to a standstill? No, because they don't actually produce anything, right? Some of the teachers who have walked out are still going to be paid today. But guess why? Because they didn't inform the schools as to whether they were going to go on strike. So a lot of the schools have shut down anyway, not knowing whether they could open because they didn't get the information. Now, if that doesn't tell you all you need to know about teachers, then I'm sorry, I cannot help you. But let's talk now to Len Shackleton, who's a rail expert at the Institute of Economic Affairs, also Professor of Economics at the University of Buckingham, because Walkout Wednesday is upon us, Len. But there's an awful lot of people who haven't walked out, an awful lot of people who are just trying to get on with their daily lives today, aren't there?
There are. I was listening before to what you were saying, Mike, about the way in which the government messes up a whole range of things. And I mean, one of the things I've been talking about recently is the plans for the railway in the future, rather than, you know, we may patch up the current rail dispute. I think that's what will probably happen.
Yeah.
But it'd be foolish to kick the can down the road and not rethink what we're doing with the railways, because they are in a complete mess. And the idea of giving it all back to the government in the form of a new type of British rail, a nationalised industry, I think is fundamentally wrong.
Yes. I mean, I suppose the question on most people's lips today will be, what is the point of all this striking? Because it's now been going on for quite a long time. In the railway workers' case, I think months and months and months and months. Nothing seems to be changing. The government's positions don't seem to be changing. The NHS continues with its strikes, but they haven't really had the effect, I don't think, that they thought they would have. I think people are generally more resigned to it now. I mean, I personally walk in to work every day, assuming somebody's on strike, not really knowing exactly who it is, and just getting on with it.
Yeah, well, you're fortunate if you can walk into work, Mike. I live in Shoebury-Ness, and the only way I can get in really is by train, and so today I'm at home.
Right.
And my kids are at home in the other room. You know, they're off because of the teachers' strike. Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah.
But you know, a lot of people just think, well, the government ought to, you know, settle with them and so on. But you're talking about huge amounts of money to settle all these claims, aren't you? You're talking. I mean, some estimates suggest it's somewhere between 10 and 20 billion pounds, which it will cost to meet the claims which are being made. And that's, you know, that's 2 or 3p on income tax, on the standard rate of income tax or something like that. It has to be paid for in some way, and we are in a very difficult situation here. I think the government should not just roll over to keep, you know, the media people happy. We see all this stuff on the BBC, for example. I was watching the other night when, you know, it's very much oriented towards, isn't it terrible, these people are not being paid enough and so on. Why don't we dip into the government's bottomless pockets and pay for it?
Well, this is the problem. You shouldn't. I've told you before, Len. You shouldn't watch the BBC. It's bad for you. You know what it does is it leads you down a very dangerous road of depression and you know, just incredulity. Because everybody goes on about the government having this bottomless pit of money, but it's our money, right? First of all, and also the main reason why these people are all demanding a pay rise is because they say the cost of living has gone up. Well, the cost of living is the cost of living. You know, it's the same for everybody. And the cost of living is not an increased, it's not a reason to increase the amount of money you get. You know, it's unfortunate that the cost of living has gone up. But the fact is that you are not doing a better job than you were last year. Why should you get more money? In fact, quite the reverse. Most of the public services that we now receive are actually a lot worse than they were.
Yeah, well, obviously COVID and the energy stuff are a big hit to the economy, and somebody, you know, we have to pay for that in terms of a slightly reduced living standard for a year or two, I think, and we have to. We can't assume that we can just, you know, borrow yet more money to get us out of this particular hole. I mean, you mentioned productivity there, Mike, and really people do need reminding that the only sustainable way to get pay increases across the economy in the long run is to increase productivity. And our productivity record in this country is dreadful.
Yeah.
Much of it, I think, is because of the various restrictions which there are on economic activity in the private sector, which means that the productivity rate and the growth rate have slowed considerably over the last decade or so, and we need to get back onto a high growth, high productivity track. And we won't do it by simply borrowing yet more money or raising taxes to pay for inflated wage claims.
No. Tell us about your plan for the railways, Len, because that's your kind of area of expertise. What is it that you would offer as an alternative to kind of renationalisation?
Well, what I was saying in the article I wrote yesterday, Mike, was that there are, you know, we're in great danger of throwing, you know, the classic throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There are many, many things wrong with the franchise system, which is, you know, has now been virtually abandoned. But there were bright spots with privatisation. When it first began, we got great improvements on parts of the railway, on the West Coast Main Line with Pendolinos and so on. Chiltern Railways did a great job in improving services to Birmingham and to Oxford and so on. And of course, the numbers travelling on the railways doubled in, you know, after privatisation. So we need to think, what were the good elements? And one of the good elements which I don't think is sufficiently discussed, is freight. You know, freight is an entirely private operation. You know, the 6 or 7 companies which are for-profit companies that make a profit. They just pay to hire track. And they're otherwise a commercial operation. The other thing which people are perhaps more aware of is these innovative open access rail operations. The headline one recently has been Lumo, this operation from King's Cross up to Edinburgh, which is much cheaper than LNER, and is an airline-style service which has taken away a great chunk of the airline business between London and the Scottish capital. And it's things like this. Which
and how does that work then? How does that work?
Well, they you know, these are private companies which hire timetable slots essentially on the railways, and you know, they pay for it all themselves, and you know, they hire their own employees, they hire or purchase their own rolling stock and so forth. Right. And they're completely outside the mainstream operation. And you know, people may be aware of Hull Trains. It's another Grand Central to neglected region parts of the north. Now, the way in which this has operated in the past is that you're only allowed to run one of these things if you could show that you were going to increase the market, not take away market share from the government's franchises. Now, with the scrapping of the franchise system, I think that justification has gone, and we ought to be looking at certainly on the main intercity routes, we ought to be looking at open access operations as the norm rather than the exception. You know, if these things make a loss, they close down. They're not a burden on the taxpayer. Right. And that's you know, we ought to be building on things like that rather than.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because I think in the end people get sick to death of subsidising railway companies which make vast amounts of money for themselves and pay themselves vast amounts of salaries and dividends and all the rest of it. Meanwhile, the paying passenger keep seeing fares going up and up and up and up, and the service getting worse. And so there doesn't appear to be anything good in that for the consumer, whereas that model sounds a lot better.
Yeah, I think that's something which really seriously ought to be investigated. Of course, the unions are dead against it. I mean, one of the things about it, Mike,
you surprise me.
It would break up this kind of monolithic thing where all the railways are out on strike at the same time, because it's essentially we've moved back to a virtually nationalised railway where the government is actually running the whole show at the moment, the Department for Transport. Where you've got individual companies, they form their own deals with and if one company is closed down because of the strike, it doesn't mean the whole operation is closed down. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we ought to be very wary of network rail. The track and the road, the stations and so forth, all being in the hand of a monopoly body. We ought to think about breaking that up as well.
Your network rail doesn't seem to me to be fit for purpose. But we've got to run. Len, thank you very much indeed. Len Shackleton there giving his view of how we could actually transform the railways into something that is more friendly for the consumer, which doesn't cost the government money, therefore doesn't cost taxpayers money, and actually is something that you can look forward to depending upon again, which at the moment, quite simply, it isn't.